Founders Forum, episode 25.
Open your mind to a new episode of the Founders Forum, the podcast championing a free economy, sound assets, and blockchain solutions. Each week, your hosts, entrepreneur Cole Snell and economist Bob Murphy, interview pioneers and free thinkers to help you develop into the architect of your future.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Founders Forum. Today, we have a special treat. We're going to be doing exactly what the name of this podcast suggests, namely, we're going to be talking to a founder who has both a story that ends not so well, and then he learned from his mistakes, and then he has a great story of accomplishment. And so it's perfect for what we want to do here on the podcast. Specifically, I'm going to be talking with John Knific. Let me read a little bit from his official bio. He's a serial entrepreneur who has built two venture-backed SaaS, software as a service companies. He co-founded Wisr.io, and that's spelled W-I-S-R.io, which was acquired by Education Advisory Board in 2021. Post-acquisition, he serves as managing director of product for EAB, where he oversees solutions that serve 2,500 universities and interact with the majority of all high school and college students in the U.S. Knific leverages his experience building products from scratch, navigating product market fit, and balancing growth with cash constraints to coach early-stage startups. He's an active lecturer at Case Western Reserve University and advisor to a variety of seed and Series A startups. As a member of North Coast Angel Fund, he serves on due diligence committees. Also, a little inside baseball. So John is a personal friend of our CFO, Jeff Briggs, here at Infineo, and that's how John ended up on the podcast. Very glad Jeff made that introduction. As we'll see, it's a very interesting story, almost textbook case that John was in school, then he and some friends and a roommate decided to launch a company. And it went great for a while, and then the problems set in. And so with that little teaser, why don't we go ahead and dive into my discussion with John Knific. John, welcome to the Founders Forum.
Hey, Bob. Great to be here.
So, folks, what we're doing in this episode, as I would have said a little bit in the intro, is definitely catering to what the name of the podcast suggests, Founders Forum, because John has a good story for us about what he learned in terms of, one startup he tried and then how he took that and then parlayed it into a smashing success. And so that's exactly the sorts of lessons that we want to give to you folks who are tuning in. So, John, just before we dive into, what happened when you started your first company, can you just give us a little bit of background? I guess you thought you were going to go into medicine?
Yeah, that story is becoming more and more distant by the year because So I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but a lot of my family's from Cleveland, Ohio, and that's where I am now in Cleveland. When I got accepted to Case Western Reserve, which is where I went to school, they had this early access medical program, basically. So at 18, I essentially knew I was accepted to Case Medical School, which is like this golden ticket for a lot of people. But I'll try to tell the quick version of the story. By my junior year, I was having more fun building and designing websites for people, and I ended up studying abroad and writing sort of an executive summary for an app I wanted to build. And when I got back my senior year, cliche, pulled my roommate in as my co-founder, and we launched what was the first incarnation of my first SaaS company, raised some angel money, which
Can I ask you, John, what year was that, roughly?
Yeah. So 2009 is when I graduated. So that was around 2009.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead. I just want to get an idea of the time, just to, for people to know how developed was the internet and that sort of thing. Okay. So.
Yeah. And actually that makes for kind of a fun sort of anecdote for the story. This was like dawn. So this was like 2007, 2008. I was cooking up these ideas, kind of dawn of Web 2, right? So like I have this ticket to med school, but I'm seeing Vimeo launch. I'm seeing YouTube launch. Facebook had just launched. And I thought this stuff was really cool. And it felt very distant though, right? Because I'm sitting here in Cleveland, this stuff's going on in Silicon Valley for the most part at that time. Even the New York, I think like SaaS startup scene was early then. And I just started trying to find people locally who could help me think about what does it take to grow a startup. One of my first mentors was a guy named Charlie Stack, he sold, I believe it was books.com to Barnes and Noble for a really good exit, sort of early Web 1 type stuff, e-commerce. And
Can I ask you, John, meaning he had set up an infrastructure, or they just wanted the domain name and he was just squatting on that?
No. He built infrastructure.
Okay.
Yeah. But where I was going with this was, so, you said, when you said you almost went to medical school. So I'm sitting there my senior year with an angel investor, this cobbled together network, and basically dove into my first venture head first. They deferred me for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So a year later, they called and asked if I still wanted to go. And candidly, at that point, I thought it was better to go to someone more deserving who really cared
right.
about going to medical school. But anyways, yeah. So it's, happenstance that I fell into entrepreneurship, and obviously I can tell more of the story, but
let me
go ahead.
Just tease out some elements. But by the way, so I went as an undergrad. Are you familiar with Hillsdale College? It's near. Okay, yeah, it's near. We knew Kalamazoo because anytime we wanted to go do something fun, we had to drive. Kalamazoo was a place we might go. So I was there as a student, and then I taught there for 3 years after I got my PhD. So that's
nice.
Familiar. Sorry,
was Bell's Brewery around at that point, or is that too?
I don't remember. It may have been. It doesn't stand out to me, but I don't remember.
Anyways, yeah.
So everyone, see, this is what college kids care about, folks. So I'm just curious. You said, because you was kind of fast, but you designed websites and sold them to people. That was something. How did you get into that?
Yeah, I think a lot of all of these new tools were coming out to learn on, to prototype, to design. So again, this was 2007, 2008, 2009. There weren't all the playbooks and web-based tools that there are today.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't no code MVP builders, things of that nature. So a lot of me sort of getting excited about this was learning just a little bit of light sort of UI, UX, and wireframing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want, I can kind of tell you how I fell into that first venture.
I think because where I'm going with it is I think there are a lot of people. When I was younger, I thought, there's people who know how to run businesses, and that's a certain class of human being. I'm not one of them. I thought I was going to be wealthy, but I thought it was going to be because I'm real productive and smart, and someone will pay me a high salary and blah, blah, blah. I didn't think I was going to go found a company because that takes a certain type of human being that I'm not one of them. And now I realize that I got over that fear. But so
I appreciate that comment because similarly, and for context, both my parents were music professors, and they're professional musicians. So I came from a really creative upbringing. But I had zero exposure to, we'll call it the real business world at this point, right? None of my family's friends had very few had regular people jobs, right? I probably knew more upright bass players than I knew lawyers for doctors, right? And
how many upright lawyers? Haha. Go ahead.
Nice. But that was almost a superpower. And the reason was I was just so excited by this idea of building something. I really wasn't thinking about it making me millions of dollars. Now, eventually I did. Trust me, you grow up, right? But at that time, it was just about, I almost saw it the same as a project or a creative endeavor. I wanted to build something. I found the idea of that fascinating and having something of my own, essentially. So, yeah.
So were you the one that recruited? You said it was literally your roommate that you pulled in the business, or that you went in the business with, or was it just your friend? I can't remember what you said.
Both. So one of my closest friends and roommate, him and I, so he was a music and audio recording major, and our third friend, who was not a roommate, was a comp sci major.
Okay.
And the first incarnation of what we started building was candidly pretty silly, right? We were trying to essentially build, the best way I can describe it is almost like an audio and video version of a LinkedIn for artists, right? We were really into media, and we saw YouTube, and we were thinking, hey, maybe there's this play where we create a more robust sort of video-based portfolio tool that artists can use. Very clearly no revenue model. But this is my first.
All right, just so I can understand. So the idea was, hey, it would be neat if, and when you say artists, you meant that broadly, like visual arts, but also, musicians and so forth?
Precisely.
So a thing where they can all link up together and see each other's work and collaborate, and there's nothing like that. So why don't we go ahead and build that? Is that the thing?
Yeah. Picture a 20-year-old kid looking at Vimeo, YouTube, all of these web social media, new rising companies, and sort of wanting to build something in that model, essentially. So we started. I'll just fast forward a little bit. We started building. We didn't have a customer in mind. We started building this video portfolio tool, and one of the best things that ever happened to me was sat down with the Cleveland Institute of Music. My goal in that meeting initially was, hey, maybe the school will want to partner and give this as a tool to all the students, and we'll test getting some adoption on this thing. The director of admission was there, saw the little mock-up and demo we had put together, and asked us if it could be used for enrollment. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, we get mailed around 1,200 DVDs every year. They come in within the same few weeks. He showed us to this room with literally like big media drawers of DVDs. They physically replicate them, put them into cartons, give the cartons to faculty member who go and grade them. And that's their admissions process for a student who's applying remotely, essentially. And when he saw this profile in a video player, he pictured that solution to that pain. So all the lessons you eventually know to apply of like, what's the pain point you're solving for? What's the minimum viable product? What are the unit economics? It sort of, I got a crash course in those lessons in that room, because the follow-up question was, well, what's it worth to you on a per student basis to do something like this? And apparently the students had to pay a $20 fee if they were going to mail something in. So we essentially offered to split the fee with them and take the work off their plate and digitize everything. And within 3 months, my co-founder, who was a developer.
Sorry, John, can I ask you this? If it's occurring to me, maybe it's occurring to the audience. I'm astounded that was what the process was before you came along. And there wasn't, like, they couldn't just have them somehow upload an MP4 to them? Am I missing something?
2009, 2010, uploading a 30-minute HD recording where you can actually hear the person playing to accept them, 3% acceptance rate to a school. That didn't really work online very well.
Okay. I guess the 30 minutes I didn't realize. I thought it was more like, I'll read my 800-word essay as to why you should accept me.
It's also workflow. So this is what we ended up learning. The video was just a feature. The product was actually the workflow of them submitting, them getting routed to the right instructor, the instructor clicking through, writing their review digitally, hitting submit, and then it calculating all those scores and spitting out an Excel file of their admissions results.
Okay.
That was actually the real solution, but video was a way to actualize it for music schools, whereas for everything else, for non-arts programs, the documents work, right? You don't need video.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So it had to be high quality because part of they're like playing the trombone or something is part of the admission.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. That's
violin, piano, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So this was a super niche market, which I don't think we totally appreciated at the time, but this was my lesson in entrepreneurship was we built this, we called it a virtual audition tool, I think. It was not much of a brand, but very quickly for about, call it 20 to 30,000 in ARR per campus, started knocking down schools of music, arts programs, arts competitions, and got it to a few 100,000 in ARR, basically within a year of graduating college. So it solved a real pain. No comment on how good the infrastructure was. We were kids building it, but it worked, and we worked with Juilliard. We worked with the Manhattan School of Music. So we were kind of like the front end portal for a lot of these schools. And I think why that's also important to my story is that was essentially the second company I started, and I won't tell that whole story yet, but eventually our acquisition at Wiser was by one of the largest, most formidable education technology companies in the world, EAB. And so like that kind of moment at CIM to 12 years later be acquired by EAB was a big run in ed tech for me, essentially.
Okay, great. Okay, so but basically, can I ask you, you went in that meeting and it was just completely serendipity that admissions person was even in the room, right?
Yeah, I think they just didn't even know what they were about to look at, so they just pulled in a few folks to take a look at the thing.
Okay, and then what was the turnaround time from when you realized, what the market needs from us is not what we were thinking at first, it's this thing. How long did it take you guys to deliver that?
Only a few months. We worked really quickly. Yeah, it was a very simple, one of the coolest things. So we grabbed a friend. His name's Nick Barrett. He's actually leads the IoT Institute at Case now. He's like one of the smartest engineers I know. So him and Eric Newman, who is our CTO, put together a self-hosted transcoder that could do HD video and convert, put out the MP4 you mentioned from any file. And we basically whipped together a branded login, a table of submissions, and a form submit view for each of those screens. And that was version 1.
Okay, great. And did they give you a guarantee and you just, we just go build this and then we get paid? Or did they say, well, go give us something to look at and maybe we'll pick it up? Do you remember?
There was a lot of back and forth. What we landed on was a model I actually used when we started Wiser with my two co-founders, Kate and Chris, at fast forward to 2016 is when we started Wiser. First company was called Decision Desk. What we essentially stumbled into was a dev partnership where the first handful of clients were essentially signing a 1-year contract, but the trigger on it didn't start until delivery of the app. So there was skin in the game to get it delivered, but they were on the hook to pay us if it did what it was supposed to do.
I gotcha. Okay. And was that, I'm just curious, like when the final numbers were settled upon and you do, we just got to deliver this thing and we get paid. Were you guys like jumping around and high-fiving each other? Or was it like, this ain't too bad?
We were pretty excited. But what's funny is we still had a little bit of the grand allure of still being this big platform. So we were like, this is great. We're going to do a few of these and it's going to pay for us to do the cool, big, dreamy SaaS thing.
Right.
That stupid kids.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it was a mixed enthusiasm, but we weren't sure what to latch on to. I will say there were a few really amazing glory years where really without much of a sales team, it was mostly me and Mark at that time. We were calling every school in the country and we were getting a really high conversion rate because it was a niche, unique product. It solved a very acute pain. And so there were a few cool years where we were just walking out of the room every few hours with a signed contract. And that momentum feel, that magic those were some high-fiving years, I guess. We'll put it that way.
Last thing, let me ask you, and then I'll let you go back to the business story is, at what point did you realize I'm not going back to school? Was that pretty early on, or did you still think, let's let this run until it dries up and then, have money in the bank and then I'll go start becoming a grown-up?
I was standing in an apartment in New York for a string of angel investor meetings and a series of university meetings. And I got the follow-up call from Case saying hey, great news. The year's coming up. Looking forward to, it was just after the 1-year deferral. And we were all in on this. And it the phone call felt so weird. It was right. It didn't even dawn. Right. At that point, it just didn't even dawn on me. There was another path, I guess.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, so things are going great. This is the part of the movie, like 25% into it, where the star of the movie's running around, and everything's going great. And so, I don't know how you want to do you want to tell more about the upswing, or is at some point, as people already know because there was foreshadowing, things turned around?
Yeah, we can get to the dark stuff.
Okay.
That's the fun in retrospect, I guess, the part of the story. So this is a good cautionary tale in us oversizing the market opportunity and bringing on a really healthy roster of angel investors who just liked us. We had spirit. We were good at building stuff, right? So we had raised, to be honest, I can't remember the exact number per year. It felt like we were always raising, which was also a problem, right? There's a problem in that because we probably could have been profitable, but we kept pushing. So we had raised a few $1,000,000. We had raised a small Series A, and we were at I want to say around 1.2 million in ARR with a small team. And it just wasn't big. It just wasn't big enough to justify that investment. And so we went into a period of...
I'm sorry, gentlemen, but just a minute, because I'm imagining some people at home might be, what did you need the money for? Like if you built the thing already and then schools did you have to tailor it to each new school, or what was the investment for?
To be honest, we shouldn't have raised against that initial version. Yeah. So we were starting to test expansion into using the video as a video interview product.
Okay. So you were going to beef up the product.
Corporate. Yeah. If we can do video for music schools, can we also do music for XYZ, right? Talent recruiting, athletic reels. It literally looked, I used the Wayback Machine to find snapshots of our old website from 10 years ago. And it literally was 12 verticals, in icons across. It was the epitome of throwing spaghetti and see what would stick.
Sure. Okay. I got it.
So instead of because to your question, we could have absolutely been a 4 or 5 person team doing low 7 figures ARR and just owning that niche. There would have been no need for capital in that scenario. Instead, we were more like a 12 to 15 person team, stretched thin across trying a bunch of different new verticals for expansion. So what we landed on, so at that point, we were stretched really thin. We had to reduce the team down because we were crunched. This was the point in the story where my co-founders peeled off. They didn't want to be a part of the venture anymore. I did. There was also some tension because they set up shop in New York City. My co-founder Mark's from New York. So I wanted to build it in Cleveland. They wanted to build it in New York. And this isn't a versus, right? I think there was a lot of opportunity that could have happened if we had been fully in New York. But I had raised most of the money in Cleveland. A lot of the core team was here. So there was tension there. We'll just leave it at that. So they peeled off. My instinct was to double down on education and push into more of the enrollment process. I brought on a guy who was very seasoned in selling enterprise SaaS into higher ed, but a thoughtful sales guy, right? Like a kind of a go-to-market sales guy, not just beat down the door. And him and I essentially put together a plan for something that looked more like a full-scale sort of admissions application review product. So a little more doc management heavy, things like that. And we were able to land a few 6-figure sales selling that product into larger universities. So we were like, all right, we did it. The fast forwarded version of that story is because we now had this bigger market opportunity, we raised even more capital. We grabbed, we'll call it about a dozen 6-figure contracts, but the requirements on those contracts from an engineering standpoint, at this point, I didn't have the right technical leadership in place in the team. We kind of went through a string of different lead engineers, but no one who really owned it like a founder would own it, which is hard. And in one project, we were supposed to integrate with PeopleSoft. In another project, we were supposed to build a Salesforce add-on, right? So we went from like niche, nail your one lane to this is borderline professional services, right? From like an engineering standpoint.
Right.
And we just weren't equipped as a culture and a team to really handle that.
Mm-hmm.
And because we had raised at this point about 5 million, because we were over 2 million in ARR, so that's not a crazy number to raise if you think you're banging down $200,000 contracts per school. We just hit a really sticky point because there was a CRM player in the market called Slate that between them and some of the other main CRM players, what we were doing became a feature of those products, like the doc management, the application portal, some of the email tooling we were building. And so we got squeezed, right? We were just stuck. We were having trouble growing. We were having trouble executing. So this was, if we're going to talk about the sad part of the story, this was 2015. After kind of flatlining for a while, I decided it was time to sell or step out of the business myself. The board agreed. We had been 7 years since the very first version of that story, right? Back at Cleveland Institute of Music. And they decided to bring in another CEO to try and maybe pull some more capital together, pull it out. Ultimately, it went for basically a fire sale. Investors got kind of pennies on the dollar back. And I had some battle scars and learnings from it, unfortunately.
Okay. So I guess some of it you already said explicitly, but just looking back, if you could give lessons for would-be new founders, like what kind of pitfalls to avoid. Because you don't want to tell them, once you do one thing that works, just don't ever deviate from that. Don't try to grow, because that doesn't seem like the right advice. But
that's not the right advice, no.
So what would you say?
I guess there's, I think, a key difference between finding expansion opportunity around the core nugget of value that you are great at as an organization versus chasing new big shiny objects and chasing whales. We got into a little bit of a whale hunting frenzy to try and prove we were a different organization than we were. And it created dissonance between sales, product, engineering, customer success, because there was a thing we were very good at, and then we were out in the market talking about a thing we weren't very good at. I still meet founders today, do a lot of coaching, and we can talk about the venture studio I booted up earlier this year. But you still see a lot of founders who sort of lose sight of who's the person in the organization you're driving value for. And if you're expanding, being very clear about what job functions are you helping them within that expansion and who's in the orbit to do that expansion, versus top down, like getting excited about new markets, getting excited about big TAM numbers, total addressable market numbers. If it's a bottom up growth, organic, land and expand, I'm here for that all day. That's how great companies are built. It's, I think, when you sort of get excited about something that takes your eye off of your core execution path, I think that catches up with you eventually.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Great way of putting it. Okay. So it wasn't there that you hung your head and said, "Hey, can I still go to med school?" That's not where the story ends. So,
no.
So what happened then?
No, that's where the chip on the shoulder was formed, and I said, "I'm going to be successful come hell or high water." So fortunately, I intentionally skipped a part of the story. Late in the game, I had brought in a woman named Kate Bolzer as head of business development. She came from an admissions background. She also had her MBA from UChicago Booth. Super smart, really knew the market, could text with VPs of enrollment, just knew, like, it sort of enforced it. And it was unfortunately a little too late, right? Like, we were already like boxed in on product and issues, but we got along really well. And we had a little bit of this feeling like if we had a blank slate, maybe we could build something for education and we would know how to sell it, and we'd have all the cautionary tales on how to build it. And that's what we did. So we started Wiser, and fortunately, a guy who, I consider one of my closest friends. His name's Chris Ciccarello. So he was coming off of another venture at the same time and very close, similarly, just had two sort of back-to-back burns on startups, but like amazing at his craft and the kind of guy that normally is like tough to recruit. We essentially talked him into like giving it one more go.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had like an offer letter from, I think it was Fog Creek or Trello at the time, and basically said, nope, let's do it. So we teamed up, equal third co-founders, and booted up Wiser. From the lessons learned and folks who still believed in us from the first company, we were able to close, I think, about $150,000 in pre-order contracts from 5 pilot institutions. And we raised a $500K pre-seed round, I would say within about 6 months of founding the company. So we took a lot of those lessons learned and applied them to give us a fast start at Venture 2.
And but this was a similar but new product that you were doing?
Yeah. So, of course, here's the perfect thing. We had a lot going for us on the execution front. The first version of the idea for Wiser like totally didn't work.
Uh-huh.
So Kate and I were a little obsessed with this idea that every student should have a personal board of advisors going through college. You should have an alum, you should have a mentor, you should have a peer mentor, and student success was a concept that was kind of ablaze in the higher ed community. I mean, I'm going to fumble over them because I haven't had to look up the most recent stats, but ballpark numbers, about half of students in the US graduate in 6 years, about 40% graduate in 4 years. Half. Like, this isn't like 70% of kids graduate, it's like 50%, 40%, right? And so retention was kind of you're seeing tuition do this, retention do this. Like, kind of people are starting to panic, and there's a lot of news cycles running about this. And so we wanted to attack that macro problem, but this was our idea for a solution that would make sense and be an organic way to get into the school. So first version of the product looked kind of like a private social network, but very focused on getting a mentee connected with a mentor. We didn't use that word. We let the school kind of pick the words they were using. So usually it was a student with like an alum ambassador or a student with a peer mentor. And that was the first version of the product. So we had student success, career services, alumni relations, student experience. Those are the sort of offices at the school that would buy the solution. The problem, though, we knew higher ed really well. We were good at going and selling. We were good at having the conversations. It was a little too nice to have. It was not a perfect drawn line to revenue. And it was a reminder that enrollment and advancement are the only two true business offices at a university. They think more like a business. They're thinking of revenue on an annual cycle.
Right.
Everything in between that is more it's more like government, right? It's institutional. And so we accidentally kind of wedged ourselves into that slower moving middle section as opposed to being on the business functions. And so, are you cool if I keep going on the story?
No, this is like, because I told you, like I was a college professor in 2 places for a while. So yeah, this is all resonating. I totally get what you're saying, that there are staff at a college that are very much business minded, and there are others that would offend them. Like the idea that dollars and cents are going to influence my decisions.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's tricky, man. There's no silver bullet for that. That's for sure. But anyways, so the dark years for Wiser got dark years. We were at a few 100,000 ARR, very small team. I say we were like 8 or 9 people on some capital. We saw the writing on the wall that this was not going to scale out. In the Decision Desk version of the story, I went out, raised more money, threw more darts at more walls. At the Wiser version, Chris similarly had been burned before. Kate, just very rational and strategic thinker. We basically said, we need to pull this back down to just the founding team. We kept 2 of our interns on board because Well, they weren't actually interns. They were Venture for America fellows, like really smart young people. And we felt really bad with the idea that like they would lose their first job, right? But it was very painful. A lot of the team members were friends. We were very small, right? And we kind of knew what we were doing. So it just felt really bad, right? Like, how do we get ourselves into this mess again? But the difference was, the silver lining was, we cut ourselves to profitability, and we really drilled into what can the unit of value here be? And we had a test we were running with the University of Chicago where they were using the tool for the summer going into first year. And we looked at the data, and the activity level on their site was almost as high as every other one of our sites combined. And we were trying to figure out, well, why is that? Well, when a prospective student is admitted to school, they're making a very tough choice of what school they're going to go to. And them and their parents are basically trying to get as much inside information as they can as quickly as possible. And the version of that tool for UChicago was essentially connecting them with current students in majors the student might be interested in. So I'm admitted to 5 schools, but one school lets me talk to a second-year engineering student, talk about the experience, and chat with them on my phone over the summer. That's going to influence, right, my purchase decision.
Right.
So that you can kind of see where I'm going with this. So we had this thought, well, if this can influence yield for a school, doesn't take many additional students yielding for this to be an incredibly valuable product. And UChicago sent us their results from that year: highest yield year, lowest melt year on history. Melt is when a student deposits but doesn't show up in the fall, which is really painful, because if you deposit, they pretty much are like, check, we've got you, right? We've got you coming in. More and more students just say, yeah, I know I paid the deposit, but I'm not coming. And there were actually rulings that there was sort of, I don't want to say like blacklisting of students per se, but like for competitive reasons, it's okay if the student does that. There's really nothing they can do. And there was some regulations put in place around that. And so it became a really big problem for schools. And we, with that pivot, had about a dozen clients signing up going into January of 2020.
Can I stop you for a second, John? Just because, I've never really said, it's sort of like an airplanes model where once the plane is built and they're like on the margin having 99 versus 100 people flying, it doesn't cost them much more to have another per. You give them some peanuts or something. That's a big deal. That's, I think, the same thing with colleges, universities, that once they've got the classrooms and they've hired the faculty and whatever, to have one more kid on the margin enroll, that's just like almost pure profit to them.
Yeah, airline seats, that's a decent analogy. There's only so many seats. What matters is who's in the seat and how much they're paying for the seat. And who's in the seat really matters. They're trying to create a diverse class. They're trying to create a competitive class. And that's always the fun of it. Sometimes the students who will pay full freight aren't always the most competitive students. And that's where the scholarship game comes in, and how you lever the endowment. I mean, we didn't get into the financial aid side, so I'm not going to wax philosophical on that. But
I just seeing from their point of view, how if your tool just gives them a slight edge, and just, there were 13 students that came here this year instead of not, like, that's the margin that they're making on those extra 13 is big.
For sure. And a lot of schools, UChicago is not even the best example, because they're a powerhouse institution, right? For a middle-ranking liberal arts institution, oh my gosh, like the survival of the school is at play with with like 10, 20, 30 kids sometimes, right? And trying to grow the class size. So real need, right? So this is where timing is everything. So we felt like we were on a good growth path here. Like, we were aligned. We had made a few feature adjustments, but for the most part, it was the same product. We just positioned it for yield and melt for enrollment teams. As we were pushing that message into the market, building up marketing messaging around it, campuses start shutting down for the early onset of COVID. And I am planning to write an article, a blog post about this. Kate and I have referred to it as the $1 million email. So we had the case study of how we helped Melt at UChicago. We had the infrastructure. And one other bullet point that's mission critical, Chris being a sensational engineer and CTO, the product could actually scale, right? It wasn't going to like blow up if you put up 50 schools on it.
Mm-hmm.
So as schools are shutting down campuses, they're panicking because our biggest resistance to a sale was, yeah, but we have all the students come in person. We don't need to do this virtually.
Right.
You can kind of see where this is going. So we put together an email with a video demo, a download link of our contract, and the ability to reserve an implementation slot, which we had a limited number of because we were only a team of 5 still. And the VP of enrollment at UChicago forwarded that to all the VPs of the AAU, so large list of research and research institutions and kind of that list. We went from about 500K in ARR to 1.2 in ARR in 45 days, and then tracked to a over $2 million run rate by the middle of the year, basically off of that push.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so the bad times for for the industry, whatever. But you happen to be, you were building something and not knowing that was coming, and then all of a sudden, the usefulness of your product went through the roof.
That's correct. And the cool part was we found all of these use cases. And I will say proudly, we didn't gouge any of these schools. We didn't how much money you got. Like we had a price list, we stuck to it. And we implemented, we had people up at like 6 a.m. implementing East Coast and staying on till 9 p.m. implementing West Coast. And a lot of things that grew out of that were helping connect people over orientation, helping connect people for first year experience between classrooms for tutoring. So we became essentially a tool as a private social network that the school could utilize.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually let them use it for the full year, even though the blitz of it was 3-4 months. Most of them kept it on and utilized it through that entire year of the campus being closed. So as weird as it was, I was basically locked in this office for 3 months straight setting up sites. As weird of it as a year it was, we felt like we were charged with sort of a mission.
Okay, great. So did that, maybe you just said that, I missed it. Like, did that make you actually alter what the product ended up being given the full scale off-campus sessions? Or it was the same product and just people needed it more?
Same product, needed it more, but we kept adding, we'll call it more and more community tools, because the matching of a prospective student to a current student was the starting point. But then as they lived in the product longer, it required more things like being able to post videos, create groups. So it took on a lot of, we'll call it like social media type functionality.
Okay. But even there, you eventually wrapped that up and sold that off too? Or you're sharing it?
Yeah. So you're talking about getting the sale of the company?
Yeah.
Yeah. So because we didn't raise additional capital when we were squeezed in, what was that squeeze year? That was 2019 was the squeeze year. So we didn't raise additional capital. We still had about, I think like 1.5 million in seed we had raised. So we were flush with cash from sales. Most of the schools paid a year in advance. And we had a really important decision to make, which was, are we going to find avenues to make this a $100 million company eventually? Or is this kind of a local maximum in time and space? Which, to be clear, we didn't communicate that externally.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at if you did the math on if this became the central community tool for campuses, it could have gotten really big. Like the growth tier was impressive and people really loved the product. So we had the evidence, basically the evidence that we were able to get a really great Series A term sheet, best term sheet I've ever seen, experienced in my career. But we took a second to take some temperature in the market for acquisition. And there were a few players that were in communication with us because we were in the news, schools were talking about us. We had a little bit of a buzz, or it was like a little bit of a halo effect at that time. And Education Advisory Board, we were actually another case connection. Their head of entrepreneurship, Michael Goldberg, runs the Veal Institute there. He went to Princeton with the CEO of EAB, their friends, and made a connection between Kate and David Felsenthal, who's their CEO. And strategically speaking, what was interesting is they had just acquired a 3D tours product called UVisit. And they were looking for strategic ways to provide more of these virtual experiences wrapped in, they were basically the marketing function of the school, like email, print mail, or direct mail. EAB and basically owned all those functions. So slotting in vertical SaaS made a lot of sense. And basically we had the time clock of, this is a great Series A term sheet. We're all revved up about this. And EAB basically came in with a great strategic multiple. And I'll be honest, the board was really split on this. Some of the folks who were like, they want to see more $100 million companies happen in Cleveland, or almost a little emotional, like let's grow this thing, let's grow it here. But then you had the battle wounds that I had gone through at Decision Desk, and we were just rationalizing what made sense. Ultimately, I think we 100% made the right decision, but it's still a very emotional decision. And we chose to sell the business. And so that deal closed in Q1 of 2021. And I ended up staying on for 2 years as their managing director of product, which, now that you've heard my story, was my first job.
Okay.
And I remember day one there, I reported to, her name was Hope, one of the main VPs there, in charge of this whole division. And I was like, Hope, I don't know if you know this, but you're my first boss. And she thought I was joking with her. I was like, no, really.
Yeah. You had to keep track of your vacation days and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think I worked a lot harder when I worked for myself, just to be
Yeah.
But yeah, man, that was the wiser story.
Okay, well, great. Well, we're coming up on the clock here. I want to respect your time, but so I guess any final lessons, from you, because it was interesting with that. It was even in the case when it worked, it looked like there was a crisis moment, but you guys were able to thread that needle and salvage it. But it looked like you had a similar pattern going. I can imagine. Did you panic and think we did it again? We tried to grow too fast?
Yeah. Oh, definitely had the panic, but a little bit of motor memory kicked in, fortunately. And I think the big takeaway was get back to basics, right? And so, not to shameless plug, but Chris, the CTO I mentioned, him and I started a venture studio in February when we left EAB. And we essentially partner with amazing founders and a lot of solo founders who maybe don't have that tech lead on their team. And we essentially do a combination of cash and equity and in-kind services and actually help build out product. And a lot of that is applying these lessons learned, which you do it on the earliest stage where you really figure out what is going to differentiate this to this end user and how are they going to get immense amounts of value, where you can convince them to stop what they're doing and use your product, which is a hard thing and getting anyone to stop what they're doing and use your new stuff is the hurdle. Is that it's not competition at first, at least. That's the hurdle. And that we did the exact same thing to get us out of our pickle at Wiser was, I know we have $500,000 in revenue and we have this team and we have someone running marketing, but let's pretend we don't know what we're doing and just harvest where's the value. And that's what I think we would have totally missed the enrollment angle if we kind of kept 2 layers above that.
Okay. Well, Sounds good. And yeah, we'll put links, John, to your new venture in the show notes page, folks, if you want to check that out for further reading. So my guest has been John Knific. John, thanks so much for the interesting story and your time.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you gained some valuable lessons if you're trying to get the courage to start that new venture. Either way, we'll see you next time.
This concludes another episode of the Founders Forum. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the hosts and for previous episodes, visit foundersforum.io. Thanks for listening.